we are covering the subject of the kingdom/Christian perspective on politics. We are in an election season in the Bahamas, and there are a lot of people trying to make decisions, trying to figure out what to do about candidates, what to do about political parties. And so what we are going to do is we're going to take a look behind the scenes on what politics is all about, what is the role of the church in politics, what's the role of a believer in politics, and we're also going to examine some critical aspects that help us to make decisions. So before we begin and introduce our guests, I want to mention a couple of things. First of all, one of the things that has hampered believers in this whole process of understanding politics is that we've had different schools of thought. One school of thought said that we are supposed to be separated from the world. The Bible says, be in the world, but not of the world. And then another verse says, come out from among them and be separate. So some believers have interpreted that to mean that we leave the governing process to a group of people who are non-believers, and we just stay out of it and focus in on spiritual things. And then what happens in a process like that is that it means that very, very important contributors to the whole process of nation building are left out. And then the persons who are left out, they become victims of the decisions instead of participants in the decisions. I always say this: if you don't have a seat at the table, you'll become a victim of the negotiations. So some believers who have taken that posture to be separated from the world have become victimized because I believe they don't understand politics. Politics really comes from the word politikos, which means of, for, or relating to citizens. That's what it says. And so when you are a believer, the question is, are you a citizen? Sure, we are a citizen of heaven, but are you a citizen of the Bahamas? If you're a citizen of the Bahamas, politics relates to you. And if politics relates to you, then you have to be involved. Another part of the definition about politics, it says that it means the distribution of power and resources within a given community. This is a part of politics. So if all of us need to share resources and power needs to be distributed and attributed properly, then how can we be left out of the process? So these are some of the fundamental concerns and issues about the political process in general. So first of all, we need to understand what politics is, how it functions, and then we need to determine what is our role. One of the interesting things that Jesus said this. Jesus said, go into all of the world. And he said, go into all of the world. Politics is a world. So how can we not go into the political arena if Jesus said go? He also said, be salt and light. And he said, be light to the point where you don't hide. He said, if you have light, don't hide. He said, we are the salt of the earth, we are the light of the world, we are like a city set on a hill. So when we shine, people get attracted to the principles of the gospel and their lives are changed. So that tells us that we really, really need to be involved. So that's the backdrop that we're going to start with. And our special guest today is none other than someone who is, as they say proverbially, who's been in the belly of the beast and who is quite familiar with the political process, having been the former Speaker of the House and a Member of Parliament for the Garden Hills constituency. Or was it Garden Hills?
That's
Garden
correct.
Hills constituency.
That's right.
And as we know that he has since demitted office, and he's on the sidelines now, so we can use him. I didn't want to use anybody who was in the front line right now because it can get polarizing at this time, and people accuse you of being one side or the other. But I happen to know this gentleman very well, and I know his character, and I believe that he's an excellent voice to share with us today. So let's welcome Dr. Kendal Major.
Thank you very much, Pastor Dave. Delighted to be here, delighted to be with you. It's
Wonderful.
a wonderful season.
We're so glad that you could make it. So let's get right into it. In my opening, I talked about people not understanding politics and the role of a believer, a Christian, a kingdom citizen. Sometimes we use those terms interchangeably. What do you say?
Well, I like to take it from two angles. One is my theology based on what the Bible says to me about politics and who is a politician and what a politician does. That would be where I would start. And secondly, one of the individuals who is an advocate, whose nonviolent advocacy made a difference in the lives of many of us over the years. Firstly, my theology has been shaped by what I believe Jesus Christ brought to earth when he came 2,000 years ago, and that is the kingdom. And through that kingdom, he colonized the earth by making heaven, bringing heaven to earth. And I think that his intent in doing that was revolutionary, because in essence, he brought a political movement to earth. I believe that based on what the kingdom message says to me about how we ought to function on earth. And so in essence, politics is ubiquitous. It is around us, through us, immersed in us in every sphere. Where there's church, sports, the corporate world, politics is here. And particularly in the governance of a country where there are competing forces for a democracy, there has to be a competition of ideas. It causes persons to must get involved. How good it is when a kingdom citizen is in the place of authority, being a part of making laws that benefit the community rather than a single person. And the other individual I mentioned about was Martin Luther King. He made this statement. He said, the hottest place in hell is reserved for those who remain neutral in times of moral conflict. Well, during a time of election, there's a competition, there's a conflict. Some of it good, some of it not so good. That is not the time to be neutral. That is a time for kingdom citizens to have a voice, have a stake, be a part of the process, certainly by voting, getting involved at politics at all levels, whether it's school, whether it's government, whether it's the education, whether it's music, whether it's sports. Politics is here to stay. It is a necessary part of who we are and what we need to do, and it's here to stay. We must compete.
Agreed. And I think one of the interesting things about understanding politics is that politics is not just parliament.
Correct.
Politics is any position of authority
Correct.
that can influence person's behavior or shape the policies in the community.
Exactly.
So that could be the school board, it could be being the president of some council, it could be even being a businessman. All of these things are political in nature because of what politics means. Sometimes we confuse frontline parliamentary electoral politics with politics in general. And so I think it's important for believers to understand that the person who is the president of the school board occupies a political position.
Exactly.
When we look in the Bible, sometimes we look at the heroes of the Bible and we think that all of them were preachers.
Exactly.
Moses was actually a politician. Joseph was a politician. Daniel was a politician. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Exactly.
And King David was a politician.
No doubt about it.
And so we have to understand that we have to be a part of the political process, but we need to understand how that functions and how believers can function within it. One thing I also wanted to mention is that Jesus never said he was going to introduce a religion. He said he has a government. It's an invisible government, and it supersedes the governments of earth.
Yes.
But nevertheless, it is a governing system.
Yes, exactly.
Give me your thoughts on that.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. This governing system is a kingdom. This kingdom influence is the life of what Jesus did during the Gospels. He brought these Gospels. For example, we would refer to the golden rule as, in the world, the worldly system, they would say the man with all the gold makes all the rules. But in a kingdom culture is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's diametrically opposed to each other. But yet in a kingdom culture, that type of influence is what is necessary to bona fide, to really help people and move the Commonwealth forward, because kingdom culture is about a Commonwealth. It's not about being selfish. It's not about being self-serving. It's not about corruption. It's not about this trust issue that we're faced with our government leaders, not just here, but all over the world. But if we bring the heavenly culture of a moral, revolutionary culture of what the Bible says on how we ought to get along, how we ought to conduct ourselves, then our economy will change, our community will change. People wouldn't be as restless as they may be now when it comes to who they would want to support for an election. So this is a very, very important time for Christians in particular to analyze, assess, and look at the representative, that candidate who comes to their door, who they're looking to on the internet or they're seeing on television. Who are they? What do they stand for? What are their core values? And how can it benefit the community at large, not just the individual?
Just before we dive into the whole current political process, I wanted to mention something. When we look at what the Bible says, when the righteous are in power, the people rejoice.
Indeed.
So basically, what it's saying is that we need to have righteous people in power
Yes.
in order for the kingdom model or the
Yes.
model that Jesus talked about
Yes.
to impact the earth. And wherever righteous people who are governed by God's system, wherever they are in power, then everybody benefits, everybody wins.
Exactly.
Okay.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, the question is, people are restless and they're moaning, and the question is it working for us? Do we see that we always want? We cannot have righteousness unless there are righteous people leading.
Right.
And so the thrust is for righteous persons, not perfect persons, but persons who respect, honor God, honor their family, and desire to live right and accept the Lord. These are individuals that you would want to represent you, because their conduct and their decision-making should be in the best interests of all.
Indeed. Now, let's get to talking about political parties and candidates. One of the things that I always say is that all of the politicians come from the same pool. So how do we determine who's a good candidate, who's a bad candidate? How do we determine who to vote for? Somebody said one time that when you go into politics, you don't grow morals when you get there.
Correct.
So in determining who we should vote for, we have to actually examine their lives as they exist now.
Right now, exactly.
And what's their history, how they treated their family, how they have been in business, what kind of reputation they have. Let's talk a little bit about what to look for in terms of political parties and candidates.
Yeah, I would say politicians, we are a microcosm of our society. Politicians come from among us, and so we are who we are. And who we are really is our character, not necessarily what we say, but what we do. And it's important for it, as we analyze and assess the typical politician, is we should, look at how they conduct themselves, ask them the tough question about their core values, look at their antecedents as to their practice in the community now before they have arrived in politics, look at how they have prepared themselves, whether it's through their experience, whether it's through their knowledge and information. This is really an important part of it. Now, I recognize in our context, that could be somewhat of a challenge, because we have on one side persons looking at a party and they are voting necessarily for a party to win, and then on the other side, or mixed somewhat in between, persons are looking for a candidate. and want to put a candidate in the House of Assembly and try to manage that. That can be a little complicated, but let's try to simplify it. At the end of the day, we need to put in the best persons to govern the country, whether it's opposition, government, because they collectively make up the governance of the country. And so I think the best approach for that is to find the best 38 persons, leaders, bona fide leaders, authentic leaders who can represent our country, particularly in this most critical juncture in our history with COVID going around, the educational system, all of the challenges we face with healthcare and the global conditions. We need persons of value in public life at all levels, but in politics in particular, because the politicians of today manage the purse and have the purse, meaning the public purse of our taxes, and they have the authority, delegated authority, to do what they think is in our best interest. So it's important for us to put the best persons to lead us.
Excellent. Now, looking at it from another perspective, my feeling and my thought is that politics comes down to two important things: policies and principles. So, for example, if you have a candidate or a party that have high morals and high principles, and these are principles you espouse, but yet they have policies that go contrary to what you feel is the best for the country, how do we navigate that process?
Policies and principles. Principles, by its very nature, ought to be consistent with, for example, let me put it in this context: laws. For a law to be made, the policy that comes from a law ought to be moral. It ought to be beneficial to the largest segment of society and move the country forward. And so it is important then that the principle, if the principle, meaning if it's moral, the policy that comes from that will likewise be moral. So you can't operate in principle on one side and then have immoral policies. So the core value and what is undergirding that core value, which is the purpose of persons coming in public life, if that is founded on good character or good moral grounding, then what emanates out of that is good principles and good laws. And from those laws, good policies. Now, not everything politicians do in policy we would agree with. We have to trust them and we have to believe that they have gone through the deliberation. But if they were to be democratic in their approach by town meetings, discussing matters with the people, being transparent, speaking the truth, then they would have earned the trust from our people, and then we would expect their policies to be consistent and aligned with the kingdom of God.
Okay, let's look at it another way. Let's say both parties, or let's say that you have 5 parties, they all have similar policies and you have some slight differences. How do you make a decision in terms of, do you say, well, okay, let me find the party whose policies align with my vision and my belief system the most, understanding that all of them may have similar policies, but one is a little bit more. What do you say there?
I would say it would be, who do you trust? Who do you trust more? And who do you trust more? Who has the capacity and the capability to deliver this? There are many great ideas I hear every day on the talk shows. You hear them too. Does that person or that entity or that grouping have the capacity to put that into practice and move it forward? And so all of that becomes an issue. So this is why, in essence, the two major parties have an advantage, because many persons believe that these two major parties have the capacity to take a policy and bring it to my kitchen table and make it workable, functional, and sustaining. The question is, do we trust these individuals to be able to deliver that? And that's the dilemma we're faced with, because as you would know, we would think about, well, one is no better than the other, and then we have a newer or more recent party that's emerging, and other parties, of course, and we have to ask ourselves, can they deliver? Can they form a government? Do they have the experience to be able to bring this policy that I like and I want to the fore? Now, finally, if we find a grouping that we trust, but we find that there are policies that can enhance their policy. For example, they take some ideas from one of the other persons and bring it and make it into a hybrid or bring it into theirs. This is what we're looking for. We're looking for leaders who are willing to be open, to be honest, and to listen to the voice of the people and the people around them. If we feel that we are comfortable with persons like that, then there's a chance that we could get the best policy. Okay.
Now, a number of persons have said to me, this is, I'm sure you've heard the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Both of the major parties have promised things, especially before a general election. Mm-hmm. You have a plethora of promises that come up at the last minute. Mm-hmm. And, people are saying that both parties have promised certain things and not delivered, or they've promised one thing before the election, and then after the election, they've changed. So how do we deal with that process?
I think there are two ways to deal with that. One is, and I've seen it happening now, the advocacy of people power needs to heighten. We don't have to wait. There's a honeymoon period after the election, and afterwards, the press, the smaller political parties, the opposition, whomever they may be, and the general public needs to be engaged and with other entities attempt to hold the government accountable. Nothing will change unless there's accountability below the surface, and that has to be agitated from people power. Politicians focus on numbers. If I'm a politician and you say you want change, and you want change, one of the first things, if you come to see me yourself for change, you may not be taken as seriously if you come with signatures of 5,000 people.
Right.
5,000 people on the signature could make a difference. And so we need to be able to agitate for that and hold members of parliament, hold governments, hold prime ministers accountable so that things can happen. And a good example is recalling members of parliament. Mm-hmm. There's a process for that has been engendered in other, even Caribbean countries.
California right now.
Exactly. California is in the process of it. So it can be done. It's a way to do it. But people need to feel like they have a voice. And unless they have that voice, we have to continue. And I see it every 5 years. We're still a young country, and we tend to be a little bit, the process is churning a little bit slower. But the agitation that I've seen over the last 5 years, I suspect that the next government will have a little bit more challenge than the previous two.
So basically you're saying that us as citizens, we need to speak up.
Absolutely.
when parties don't live up to their promise.
Absolutely.
So basically, you have speeches versus performance.
Yes.
So when you give a speech, we need to hold people accountable, write it down.
Yes.
What did you say? And then did you do what you say? If you
And
didn't do
remind
what you
them.
say,
Yes.
then we need to, the heat needs to go up.
Yes.
And politicians need to be held accountable. Now, speaking of accountability, what we've seen in the Bahamas, and this is not just a Bahamas issue, but what we've seen around the world, and some people may wonder, how do you deal with this? It seems like there is a high level of temptation. So, for example, every government says, we're going to be transparent, we're going to be accountable, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. 2 or 3 years in, we find one government doing the same thing that the last government did. What is it about politics that causes so many politicians to compromise and to seek to use their office for personal gain?
That's a very, very interesting question. And I would say, Pastor, let's look at the temptations of Jesus. The 3 temptations deal with the level of temptation that a politician deals with daily. One that has power. The temptation that speaks to being bread. Man shall not live off bread alone. That was enticing Jesus' thirst and hunger. One word that describes that particular thirst is sex. The desire or sexual sins with scandals. Main temptation that comes with person in position. The second one dealt with the power of dealing with power. How do you manage power? And the third deals with how do you manage arrogance and being able to dealing with power and dealing with how do you deal with yourself. Those 3 issues or those 3 temptations are constantly bombarded the typical politician today. And the only way they are able to manage that is a set of core values that governs them, having persons around them to hold them accountable. And there are also laws within cabinet authority or in public life that ought to hold them accountable. If these are adhered to, it becomes a little bit less likely for politicians to fall in these 3 areas. The sexual sins, the power, and the pride. Mm-hmm. Those are the 3. And why is that? That's because they're dealing with majority men, male, and of course the natural tendency for a male, and when he's in a position of authority, and also females too. Secondly, the money, the purse, being able to manage the public purse, and being held in a glorified position. In our society, the politician is still considered someone who is considered to be glorified. People call you chief, celebrity. They follow you're celebrity. Yeah. They follow you around, they hold your briefcase, they drive you around, they open the path for you. It puts you in a position where you feel good. I could attest to that. When I was served as speaker, there were opportunities where you would travel, and you were treated like a celebrity. The key is you must know that will not last. That must end, and you will resume a normal life one day. And the question is, are you able to resume a normal life when that comes? And so you have to plan for life outside of the limelight. And so that is always a really, really tough situation for the typical politician today, male or female. How do they handle those 3 temptations that Jesus faced? Mm-hmm. And he passed the test. That means we can pass the test.
Very interesting. So basically, politics has a level of intoxication that you're susceptible to. So
Absolutely.
When the power, the money, because what we've seen is politicians over the years, end up in jail, lose their family over these same types of things.
Yeah.
So basically, for the one of the issues that comes up sometimes is that people say to persons who are believers, y'all stay out of politics, or they almost say, well, y'all shut up and go to church and let us run the government. What do you say to that?
That's an interesting point, and it's quite true. And that's so unfortunate because it leads to this notion that politics is dirty. Politics is not dirty. Certain persons in politics are dirty. But I heard that a lot, and you know what it is, Pastor? Politics within itself and how we play it in this country, it's a kingdom within itself. It's a bubble. And you either play by the rules or you're ostracized. Mm-hmm. And the rules are conforming to this world. And the rules say that what is this world? This world was formulated by Niccolo Machiavelli back in 1469 when he produced and wrote this treatise called The Prince. And he's considered the father of modern political theory. And he spoke about how you can't be a Christian and govern people. They are antithetical, or they don't go together. Mm-hmm. You can't be a good guy and lead a lot of people. You can't be elected to office and expected to be a good guy, because you have to rule with force. You have to manipulate. You have to undermine. You have to be deceptive. These are consistent with this bubble of the political kingdom, and so people know that. They are many of them talk well, very articulate, but may have unsavory character, and they may appear to be successful. They may be successful financially, and they make a few good speeches, and they're elected, and they get some kind of notoriety. People know that, and they accept that in this circle, unless you're willing to wheel and deal and do a little cutthroat to get ahead, you ought not be here. And you're a Christian, you don't believe in this stuff, man, you need to go sit down and sit small. I reject that, because that's not the original intent of what governance and government was all about. They have single-handedly taken it over because of what has happened from this notion, this Machiavellian approach. But what that has done is that has hijacked the original intent of what Jesus Christ brought to earth, which mm-hmm. was the kingdom. It is time for the kingdom to be recompensated, to take back what was rightfully ours.
So what does a politician do? What were the principles that you used to survive in that environment and not become a part of that kind of Machiavellian system?
Well, as I mentioned to you, one of the first things that happens is you are ostracized. Mm-hmm. And you must be able to live with it, accept it, and be comfortable in your skin that it will happen. Persons may want you to sit small, may want you to be manipulated, may want you to take, compromise, mm-hmm. Quid pro quo. These are the kind of notions. I do something for you, you do a little something for me, and these little things that they would do to play with your head, so to speak. You just have to be grounded in who you are.
But the thing about it that people are going to say is, well, if you abide by these principles, for example, I had a conversation with a politician one time, mm-hmm. and he said something to me that was interesting. He said, truth and politics don't go together.
Oh, boy.
So here's the scenario that he created. He said, if you tell the people the truth, you will not be elected. And if you be elected and you want to be reelected, you still cannot tell the people the truth, because let's say, for example, we need to cut the budget. We need to get rid of some jobs. And before the election, you get up and you say, okay, we're going to govern responsibly. Our deficit is too high. We're going to have to trim some salaries. We're going to have to trim some personnel from the public arena, and we're going to have to cut this and that. What he was saying is that you can say that after you get elected, but not close to an election or before an election, because otherwise you won't be elected. So people want you to tell the truth, but if you tell them the truth, they don't elect you. What'd you say about that?
Yeah, I've heard that, I've seen that, and it's a tough balancing act. But I would my default answer, and I stand by this, is you should always tell the truth. But you should always, that's what's exciting about the new political leader or the new politician who comes in with fresh ideas and an understanding of who they are and who they represent. Because the new politician will tell the truth and bring the people with you. Tell them where we are, tell them where the budget's at, tell them what may need to be adjusted here and there. But at the end of the day, we recognize that we're running a government, not a business. And so it's not as easy as just cutting salaries or firing persons because of debt for some reason. There are alternative ways where leaders can come together to still help our country to move along. But that takes innovation, that takes sensitivity, not just lying to them. We need to believe more in our people. We need to believe that they can handle the truth. Mm-hmm. We just have to tell them in a way where we can build open dialogue, trust, and transparency. This, more than anything else, more particularly at this time, it is necessary to take us along. We need to give our people a lot more credit because they can understand that we run families. Mm-hmm. All Bahamians run families. They know when they come home, we need a certain amount of money to run the house. We need to buy bread. We need to do this. And they know when things are tough. Well, running a country is telling them things are tough. Come with me. Let's work together to build. Here's what we can do, and here's how we can help each other. Not a top down, mm-hmm. but almost a bottom up. And we are inspiring your people to come along with you for the ride. Right. I think it's a journey that can be met. I think it's a journey that people are willing to take with you if they trust you. And the challenge we have, the politician who said that to you, is he or she knows that they're not trusted. Mm-hmm. And so they believe that they have to do what they have to do to get past the post. That's Machiavellian. I reject that. That ought not happen. We call that pork barrel politics. That's the
right.
old style politics. Yeah.
Right. So basically, as a politician, you operate on your principles and you are prepared to lose because you want to make sure that you fulfill your first obligation, yes. which is to God and your conscience,
yes.
as opposed to compromising your beliefs and your principles
yes.
for the purpose of being elected. It's better to be not elected and tell the truth than to be elected based upon a lie.
Absolutely. I stand by that. In fact, I go back to when I campaigned, in the two campaigns I've run. One is you tell the truth, and when you are asked a question, and see, this is where it does get complicated. You may be asked a question that is considered over your head, where it's not directly at you, it's indirectly at you because of the persons you are associated with. Well, see, it gets a little complicated. So I can't speak for an individual or what an individual may do or what that individual did. I can't speak to that if I am not aware of that. And so tell the truth. Tell them your limitations. Stop trying to play God and tell them that you are limited in what you can provide for them. Or not give them, because that's illegal, but provide for them through the community and through the building of your society. And so it takes a different kind of mindset and a different approach. Not the I cut the $50 or $100 in half, and I give it half today, and you get the next half after you vote for me. These are the kind of things that happened in our country before. It's everything becomes quid pro quo, and everything becomes under the table, and I think people want. I think that's a part of what's making us restless, mm-hmm. and even though many persons are frustrated by it, they have become desperate because of the scarcity mentality. They've become desperate, and so they believe that they need to do what they have to do. It takes an authentic leader to reshape, be a part of reshaping their minds by educating them and inspiring them to see there's a better way. We're just waiting for that leader to emerge.
Great. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a moment. We've been talking about kingdom citizens, believers, Christians, whatever you want to call it, and our role in politics and how to navigate the political process, especially during this political season that we're in. And we've been speaking with Dr. Kendal Major, who's the former Speaker of the House here in the Bahamas, who's been a politician for some time and is currently still a politician even though he's not in office. We're going to continue now with our conversation, and we're going to focus in on what are the important issues today, 2021. What are the important issues? As you know, this is a non-partisan forum, so we're not advocating one party or the other. We're just saying, what are the important issues?
Wow. I would say there's a number of issues. I think the most important issue that's on the table is how do we manage COVID-19, and what is the government's, particularly the new government after September 16th will be, how would they approach it? There are those who believe that there will be another lockdown. There are those who believe there cannot be another lockdown. How we navigate that process and manage and get out of this and resume some sense of normalcy will be critical to the way forward. As you know, that affects the economy, and so people's pocketbooks. The economy is still in a difficult, is laboring, and persons are still having significant challenges in their pocketbooks. And of course, there's some talk about VAT and taxes and what would happen there, whether VAT will go up, whether VAT will go down. These are all some of the two most, I think, very pressing issues that Bahamians will be faced with immediately after the election.
So basically, we need to look at each party, see what they have to say about the issues of concern to us, and then listen to them, look at their track record, see how they have delivered before, whether the ideas they have presented they've actually followed through with. Okay, now let's get to another very, very important issue. What are the issues, for example, you would say, we can't go with this as a believer? For example, there are laws that people put in place. There are laws that parties espouse, and some of those laws may be favorable or in line with the laws of God. And then sometimes there are laws that are advocated that go against God. One time I characterized it as this. I said, we can build on virtues or vices.
Yes.
If a party introduces vices to put into law, then that's a problem for me because I believe in virtue. So what are the issues for the kingdom citizen, the believer, that are non-starters?
Well, I haven't heard specifically any of the political parties speak to any particular issues that are necessarily, and perhaps it's because it's election season and they want to be elected, that is necessary, have been vices and non-starters as yet. We're watching certainly very, very carefully. There's some talk about, of course, VAT, but then that's a decision that the government would have to make. There's the talk of, again, the healthcare system and how we manage COVID-19, and whether when FDA approves, if and when FDA approves the other vaccines, whether that causes a change in the law and it becomes mandatory. These are all things that we must watch and make a determination on. And I think governments, newly elected governments, would be very careful that they would probably want to go down the middle. So there's nothing that I see in the horizon that I would say that are completely non-starters at this point. I accept the fact that if the government makes a decision about limited groupings, whether it involves the church or other groupings, I think we ought to accept that. But I think the church ought to be in dialogue with the government. And so for me, I think it's important that the government, as done in the past, is to rely on the church and get some feedback, get some deliberation before a final decision is made. I would be interested to see what happens with this marijuana issue with respect to how the government will use it. There are pros and cons as to which degree that will be introduced, and it's not crystallized yet, so I wouldn't want to necessarily proffer my views as yet. So to answer your question, no, nothing yet from any of the parties, a non-starter, but we're listening, and we ought to listen very carefully. And the yardstick is, does it violate the kingdom principles and your personal ethic? And that's where it begins. How does it affect your children? Does it affect your way of life? And does it violate your values? If that is the case, I remember when I campaigned before, and I would come to someone's house and they would say, "Dr. Major, I have a couple of questions for you. Have a seat." "Yes, sir." "Yes, ma'am." "How do you feel about this topic, and how do you feel about that?" And what they was doing is they wanted to know my value system.
Right.
Just what do you believe in? What is important to you? And some persons, that's really important, and I appreciated that, because they ought to know who they're giving marking their X for. Yeah.
Finally, as we begin to wrap up, I think one of the things that's been clarified, but sometimes it's still a little foggy, is that in the Bahamas we are not operating as a theocracy. However, our preamble of our Constitution indicates that we will be guided by Christian values.
Mm-hmm.
How do you interpret that in light of political parties?
That we be guided by
Christian principles.
That's a no-brainer. That's an absolute, based on the preamble of our Constitution, which is our guiding light. I think it's a beautiful preamble that speaks to a vision for what the Bahamas ought to be. If we follow that, we would be the best little country on God's green earth. People would come to Bahamas because they would say, God is here and God lives here. And so I think that is real and that is important. And I think that ought to be the substrata, that ought to be the foundation, that ought to be the North Pole that we use to determine, I'm following this party, this politician, because they are heading in the direction that's consistent with my values.
So if a party or a politician departs from that premise, then that gives...
That's a non-starter.
Yeah,
that's a non-starter. I was just about to add, I was interested in the first question you asked about a non-starter. You know, at this juncture in our history, the non-starter is being sick and tired of being sick and tired of the same old, same old. And what I mean by the same old is every year it appears, this is, you and I talk to people and we live in it, it appears that every year, every election, we have these high hopes for aspirations. I remember how it was when I was elected. This is a great chance. The country will change. Well, we felt it did in some degree. But at the end of the day, people, the overarching majority of Bahamians are restless and they are feeling that we are not serving their interests. The non-starter for me is if I believe that a party or an individual is a part of the status quo and just want to get in power. I have no patience for it, and no tolerance for that, and that is a non-starter for me. So we have to be able to put in place the things that can really build this country economically, our natural resources, our education, our economy, our believing in our people, our sports, tourism, all of the things are natural, going into the plans for Ragged Island and green energy. This is when we want to see that the innovation and moving from crude oil and into green economy. This is the kind of talk I want to hear, and this is the kind of information and a person who can deliver this level that can move this country into its greatest light.
So basically, we need sound ideas,
Yes.
and ideas that create progress within the context of what our preamble states. So
Exactly.
great ideas that are values-based, and that take our country forward and don't allow us to repeat what we've repeated before. Well, it's about time that we wrap up now, and I want to thank all of you for watching. We've covered some very, very important topics. We're actually going to continue this series with a number of other persons in the political arena. So we want you to stay tuned, and we want you to remember that we are kingdom citizens. We are actually dual citizens. According to what Jesus said, we are citizens of heaven, we live on earth, and we are also citizens of earth and live on earth. So we are citizens of the Bahamas and citizens of the kingdom of God. But our primary citizenship is not the Bahamas, not according to the word of God. Our primary citizenship is in heaven, and we translate that citizenship on earth from a spiritual perspective. So as you prepare to vote, remember that there are certain principles that we adhere to. There are certain things that are important in the kingdom. One is we have to remember that God's laws come first. The second thing is that what we do needs to benefit the people. The third thing is that whoever we vote for, whoever we elect, we need to make sure that their principles line up with their politics. I did an article recently where I said, show me your principles before I accept your politics. People are not going to grow morals when they go in office. So you need to examine their life, where they are now, and determine if these are the people that you want to represent them. And remember to look at each party, look at their ideas, and compare their ideas with their track record, and then you make a decision. So thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.